Hi guys, Tiffany here from Tiffany Gordon Cosplay with a cosplay tutorial over how I made my Snow White sword from the game SINoALICE. And a big thank you to SINoALICE for sponsoring our Snow White costume as well as the sword build. You can get the SINoALICE game for free on your mobile device in the App Store. And here are some of the reference images that I used to recreate Snow White's sword. And if you'd like to use the blueprint that I used for building this sword, it is available on my website, www.tiffanygordoncosplay.com, or see the link below. I first started off by assembling the blueprint. I then got insulation foam and traced my blueprint onto the foam. I will note that the sword was longer than the squares that I had, so I did have to hot glue two pieces together to make one long piece of insulation foam. To cut out the shape of the sword, I then used a hot wire and slowly worked around, cutting all of the frame. And then again used my blueprint to trace the inside part of the sword onto our cutout piece, as well as drawing a center guideline around the edge of the blade. This will make it so we have reference for cutting all of our edges. And again, using the hot wire, went around and slowly cut everything at a slight angle using our center side line as a reference. To make all of the edges nice and smooth, I went in with a 2-inch long sanding drum and sanded all of the edges. Again, doing this process, you do need to be wearing long sleeves as well as a respirator and glassworking gloves because insulation foam is really bad. And I also recommend having a vacuum to help clean up all of the insulation foam dust. And the sword is extremely long, so I wanted to make it disassemble, and how I did this was I used CPVC pipes, which I then cut to the desired length that I wanted, and then attached male and female threaded ends with epoxy. The CPVC pipe will be your inner bone structure for the sword and will help make it a little more sturdy. Once all the pieces were glued together, I then traced the shape onto the insulation foam with a Sharpie, and then cut that section out using a hot wand. When it was cut out, I then inserted the CPVC pipe into the insulation foam cutout, and then used hot glue to attach the pieces together. I did this for both sides of the sword. And to help fill the negative space so it was flush with the same height as the insulation foam, I did add a strip of 2mm EVA foam to cover the insulation foam. I then traced the middle section of the blueprint onto 4mm EVA foam and cut out, followed by heat treating each of the pieces with a heat gun. To attach the EVA foam to the insulation foam, I used wood glue, covering the entire surface and smoothing it out. Normally, I would use contact cement glue when working with EVA foam, but because we're using insulation foam, contact cement glue actually melts the insulation foam, so try to avoid using it. I then slowly laid the EVA foam onto the insulation foam. For the blade pieces of the sword, I used 2mm EVA foam, which I cut out the same shape as the blueprint, but making it a little bit longer on the edge side so that way there was excess material. Again, tracing and cutting out and heat treating each of the pieces. And for attaching these pieces, I applied contact cement glue just to the edge of the EVA foam, and then put wood glue on the insulation foam part. And then starting from one side, working slowly to the other, I attached the two pieces together. Wood glue does not dry fast, so you will need to work on this in small portions at a time. Also, having weight on top of each pieces to have a really secure bond of the foam to the insulation foam. And when the sword was finally fully covered, I then went back with scissors and cut off all of the extra EVA foam, and then sanded all of my seams so they were even. There were a tiny bit of cracks and seams, so I went back with foam clay and a little bit of water and filled all of those pieces. And here's what the shape of the blade looked like after it was fully covered with the EVA foam. For all of the detail pieces on the sword, I used a combination of 2, 4, and 6mm EVA foam. Again, using my blueprint to trace all of the pieces onto the foam, as well as to cut each one out with an X-Acto blade. For attaching all of the EVA foam pieces together, I applied contact cement glue onto both sides of the surface, letting both of them dry fully before attaching them together. And once all of the pieces were fully attached, I then did a light heat treat to them using a heat gun. I then went back in with a sanding drum and lightly rounded all of the edges so they were nice and pretty. For attaching the detail pieces to the actual sword blade, I first laid it out onto the sword and weighted it down with 2-pound weight bags, and then traced each of the shapes so I knew where to apply my contact cement glue. And then when both sides of the contact cement glue was fully dry, I slowly attached the piece to the sword. And here's what the top and the bottom part of the sword looked like once they were glued together. For the handle part, I roughed the entire CPVC pipe using sandpaper. This is gonna make glue be able to stick to your surface. And then cut detailed strips of 10mm EVA foam, so that way we can wrap it around the CPVC pipes, sanding them into a half moon before gluing them with contact cement glue. For the ball part at the end of the handle, I forgot to film what I did, but basically I used a attachment for the top part of a lamp, which I first roughed up with sandpaper and then glued to the top of the sword with a combination of dowel rods and epoxy. And this is what the sword looks like before doing all of our priming. Next, I applied 4 heavy coats of Plasti Dip to both the sword blade and to the handle. And then for my favorite part, painting! For the handle, I did a base coat onto the entire surface with black Testors airbrush paint, followed by silver. And for the blade part of the sword, I then painted the entire thing with black Testors airbrush paint, and then masked off all of the edges of the blade with printer paper as well as masking tape. For the next level of painting, I then did a base coat of white Testors airbrush paint, and then went back in with a combination of grays and silvers and a little bit more black for shadowing. And when all of those pieces were dry, I then masked them off as well. The next color was doing a more lavender color, using white and purple airbrush paint, mixing them together. And for the middle gradient section of the blade, I started at the top using a very dark purple and then slowly mixing to a more white, very light purple at the bottom. And when all of the pieces were done and dry, I then slowly removed all of the masked off tape and paper. The final step for finishing the sword was to do a coat of satin clear enamel spray paint to seal everything. And then my Snow White sword from the game SINoALICE was done! Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a few new tricks to help make your own version of this sword or another sword. And if you did, remember to press the like button and also subscribe to the channel. And I will see you for our next cosplay tutorial. Much love, guys. Mwah!